No, I really am happy for the opportunity to speak about the regional situation because frequently when national actions or national strategies or policies or initiatives are being contemplated, there isn't really enough cognizance or um, examination of what is happening at the regional level. And in many instances, there are opportunities for actions that have been undertaken at a national level to really be influenced by and learn from things that are happening regionally. There are some things that are always better achieved when we do them collectively compared to when we take the country alone approach. And I will speak today to some of what we are doing in CARICOM regarding energy efficiency in general, but on the energy efficiency building code in particular. So I will speak on the context of why energy efficiency is important to us. I will speak about the policy, the strategy, and the roadmap that we are using to look at some of the energy matters. I'll speak on the regional energy efficiency strategy in particular, and I will talk about the regional quality infrastructure for renewable energy and energy efficiency, because this is a critical piece of the puzzle. It helps us to be able to implement what we are talking about with respect to the strategy. Without the quality infrastructure, we run the risk of not getting what we pay for. And of course, the building code, which is the main piece why we are here today. And then I'll talk about some of the implementation challenges and opportunities. And I will try to use these types of slides in between to keep things interesting so people know exactly where I am in the whole things. Right, so let's start with the context. The context is one where the energy system in the region has what we could call 50, 60 years of legacy issues which make us an oil-dependent economy. This just shows you what the oil import situation looks like in countries. What we can safely say is that the countries in the region collectively, except for Trinidad and Tobago, depend on imported oil for 91% of the energy use. Not electricity, but energy in total. And you see some are more dependent than others. You look at a country like Jamaica, we're at around 95% in 2011. We have got significant data that is more recent for Jamaica. But when I spoke to Fitzroy yesterday, he assured me that it was probably about 2 to 3% less than that number that we have here. So still very high. So in a sense, with the exception of Suriname, pretty much is able to support its own energy needs almost 100%, and Trinidad is a net exporter. And Belize, to a lesser extent, because of the fact that Belize has a significant hydro reserve that has been exploited. The countries are really in the 90s. Haiti is really more because of the fact that there's a lot of primitive what one could call primary energy use, biomass use, so things like wood fire and charcoal being used. So yes, there are indigenous sources for energy there, but it's really more energy poverty rather than it being in a better state than the other countries. The consequence of that is that you have countries that have this very high dependence on a commodity that is more volatile than ever, extremely volatile. It means you don't know what the price of oil is going to be next year. What we know is that the price is more uncertain now than it ever was. And in terms of market players, the CARICOM countries together consume less than 0.2% of global oil production. So we do not influence or impact the markets any at all. We really are a blip in the whole thing. So you are completely dependent on a market over which you have zero control. Not a good place to be in. It means you pretty much swings whatever direction the market goes. At the same time that we have that kind of high dependence, a common feature that we also seem to have across CARICOM region, the CARICOM region, is the inefficiency with which we use the commodity. That is, of course, I've pointed out, is quite volatile and still is very expensive, even though we tend to say it's a period of low oil prices. I tend to remind people when they talk about low oil price period that in 2004, when oil reached $40 a barrel, it was a historical event. So the 45 and 48 and $50 that we are moving about in the last 12 months is not really low. It's low compared to the band that we had grown accustomed to since 2008. But comparatively speaking, historically, it's not really a low price. It's an expensive price. But if we look at the energy intensity of the region, we see that CARICOM, which is to your collect in terms of aggregated numbers, that fourth to the right column you see here, it is higher than the NZEB, which is the small island developing states aggregated numbers average, which is just to the right of the CARICOM average. It's far higher than the EU average, probably around 3 times higher than the EU average, and it's certainly higher than the world average in terms of energy intensity. What the energy intensity measures is really how much heat content is pretty much being used to produce $1 of GDP, or one productive unit, if you want to call it that. So in a sense, it tells you that if your energy intensity is high, it tells you you're not efficient in the way in which you consume energy. If you will see that the biggest culprit is one which is awash with energy, which is Trinidad and Tobago. 45,000 BTU almost per unit of US dollar produced. When you compare that with a country like Japan, which one considers to be a resource-starved country, but one which has become very efficient in the way it utilizes natural resource, you will see Japan is around 4,000 units BTU per US dollar of GDP. So Trinidad is over an order of magnitude more. So the point is that at the end of the day, this has translated into issues related to productivity. It is not the only reason why many of the countries have underperformed economically. Obviously, people will talk about some of the other things like corruption and poor leadership and governance and all the other things. But certainly, there is a contribution that we have been able to show with respect to the impact of energy and the economic progress of the countries. In particular, the IMF has shown numbers. They have been able to do analytics and show numbers that clearly state that the countries that are tourism dependent, like ours, tend to lose around 0.8% of GDP each time there's a $10 US increase in oil prices on the global market. And those which are more commodity driven, like the Ghana and the Suriname, loses about 0.5% units of GDP per $10 increase. And the reverse is not necessarily true. It's not true actually. So when you have a $10 decrease in the price of oil, they have found that you tend to have really flat performance. Most you might find is 0.1 to 0.2% increase in GDP. So you're losing it when you increase, but when it decreases, you don't get it back. So it's one of those things that we believe has impacted significantly the economic performance in many other countries. And that is at the macro scale. At the micro scale, of course, we know that that is also true. And the impacts of those that is very clear. The fact is that many other governments end up in situations where they are not able to pay for a lot of the public service obligations that they need for the societies to function effectively and for sustainable development to happen in the way that it should. In particular, we know that climate change is perhaps the biggest threat to sustainable development, and sustainable development is what we desire as small island developing states. And we know that climate change, some people don't know, and I won't call any names. I represent a multi-government organization. I do not want my prime ministers to call and ask me, how could I say such a thing on a public platform? So I won't call names, but there are denials to the whole climate change phenomena. But those of us who are in the sciences have been tracking and studying and understanding that the climate is indeed already changing. And so we expect that there are significant adaptation costs based on the current trend that the countries will have to face. And whether they are going to get it from a GCF, which is a Global Climate Fund, or not is another story. But the point is that some of these adaptation costs will have to be met up front by the governments regardless. We have seen where in countries, and Jamaica too has seen it in its own cases. The minister spoke a while ago about what is $4 billion Jamaican dollars in damage that the recent flood rains cost. These are monies that the country have to find when these kind of disasters and these kind of things happen. And if it is that you are bleeding that money because of the way your energy sector is set up, then you're going to be obviously short in terms of resources to do other things. So if we look at it, so what the policy and strategy and roadmap was really intended to address some of these energy matters to make the countries not just utilize renewable energy resources, but also to address that common good which we have across the region, which is the inefficiency with which we use energy. So when people talk about, all the countries are different, true, the countries are different, but there are two things which are common, which which is why it's very simple to have a regional energy policy and strategy. All of them are very dependent on fossils, and all of them are very inefficient in the way they use energy. So those two commonalities alone are ways and means that we can already start addressing in a congruent way some of the issues that happen across countries. So, right, so the energy policy. Again, the CARICOM since 2003 recognized when oil prices had started climbing that at that time it was about moving from, it had jumped from about $20-something to about $30-something. So that had caused an alarm then, you know, a price of $30 was already reason for alarm. That's about the time when Tony Hilton and the guys here, PJ Patterson and so on, Prime Minister Patterson, were trying to get the natural gas into the country to try to diversify the structure of the electricity sector so that you would have greater flexibility in the electricity generation mix. And the heads of governments at the time recognized that, you know, we needed to do something regarding the energy situation in the region, so they had mandated that an energy policy, a collective regional policy for energy, be developed. That was 2003. Fast forward 2013, Ministers of Energy approved the CARICOM energy policy. So when people say CARICOM is slow, yes, CARICOM is slow, but not the Secretariat, it's the countries, because ultimately CARICOM is the countries, not this, the Secretariat is not CARICOM. The Secretariat really manages the processes that engages the countries themselves. So if CARICOM does not approve something, it is not the Secretariat that does not approve it, it's really the countries that do not, or the member states as we call it, that really are responsible. So obviously the policy has to take into consideration a full mix of things because countries are using petroleum, so it has to be considered. Some countries are using natural gas and others are even looking to bring natural gas in like Jamaica is. So it has to be considered too. We are looking at renewable energy options and are introducing renewable energy options, and energy efficiency is obviously something that we have always been interested in since the 1973 oil crisis. And there are cross-cutting issues such as climate that have been emerging and so on. So obviously it has to consider a sweeping mix of things. What was decided was that the renewable energy and energy efficiency components of the policy would have been framed within a roadmap and strategy, what we call the CSERMS, which means Caribbean Sustainable Energy Roadmap and Strategy. Reason being that the sustainable energy aspects of the work that has been done in the member states are in many instances something with which many of the countries do not have experience. Most of the countries have experiences in how to deal with petroleum and natural gas. And where they don't, we will find the players who will bring those in anyway. Those are very mature, commercially developed markets, and they are usually capable of standing on their own without their being necessarily cradled within a strategy. Not to mention that some of the countries in the region are not necessarily interested in a natural gas strategy, as Jamaica eventually found out that is regional. So at the end of the day, we agreed to look at those sustainable energy issues within the context of our roadmap and strategy, what we call the CSERMS. I keep going back the wrong way. Right, so the CSERMS pathway is one where we have been working through a systematic process of determining energy system analysis, the energy system, what it looks like, really understanding what the potential looks like for renewable energy use and energy efficiency, and look at what are the infrastructure needs, both in terms of renewable energy integration into the energy systems, as well as in terms of energy efficiency too. And looking at what is the policy framework that will be able to support those things that we identify as being important, you know, both in terms of the institutional structures and arrangements, the policies themselves, looking at setting goals and targets, and look at how we can also translate and look at emissions goals and targets related to those. You know, we recognize that we are now in an environment where emissions mean a lot, and so being able to frame a lot of these actions in terms of emissions, not just help to show that you are globally responsible, but it also can help you to raise money, and I can tell you that. So it is important for us to set common targets and visions, because at the end of the day, we believe that the countries need to have something to look towards, or something that that we could use as a basis around which they could aggregate their own national strategies. The intention was never to have a common arrangement where countries walk lock in step with each other, but really to have that what you could call that common vision towards which they could focus, each running towards the finishing line, but arriving at different times, recognizing that each have different capacities and capabilities. and supporting them to implement those things that could bring benefit to them on a collective basis, but of course supporting them in those things that are unique to their own national strategies individually, so that they could, in a sense, reach the place where they could indeed be said to be a part of the functional whole. So the process was one of a functional cooperation among members that sought to exploit those areas where there was a distinct advantage in taking a collective approach rather than a country alone approach. And from that, the roadmap was able to bring us a number of areas of priorities in terms of initiatives, policies, projects, and activities that were regional and some which were national. One of which emerged was the whole issue of the energy, the building code. From that, we were able to develop what we call a vision and goal, the vision and the goals for what CARICOM Energy represents, and CARICOM Energy being the work that has been done collectively by the Secretariat, as well as the institution which supports that work, which is the CCRE, the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. So if you notice, in terms of the vision, it's a lot of things that we're asking at the same time. We're asking for reliability, affordability, and sustainable energy services. That meets societal and development needs of the countries over time, and it should give us be based on robust, diverse energy sources and distribution systems. It should also utilize appropriate technologies, and it should be equitable and provide for all sectors. And so I always laugh with my friends from the utilities and say, just as soon as you got the reliability issues right, then we throw in a whole set of different things until we also want flexibility, and we want clean, and we want low price. And I say, I don't know how you're going to meet all those things, but it's almost impossible to get the kind of things that society is sometimes demanding of the utility in one single mix. But in any case, the first goal, as you realize, is a critical one, that citizens are aware of the importance of energy conservation, use energy wisely, and continuously pursue opportunities for improving their use of energy, with key economic sectors embracing eco-efficiency. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a fundamental piece that we believe can only happen with guidance. It's not going, the market will deliver philosophies, wishful thinking. There are things that prohibit some persons from being able to utilize energy in the most eco-efficient way based on the dynamics of the environment within which they operate. And buildings is one such. The point is, buildings in the region utilize around 80% of electricity. When you look at it in that sense, electricity accounts for about 40% of the energy that is imported in the region. So when you look at it in that way, 32% of the energy that is utilized in CARICOM is going into buildings. And when we talk about the levels of inefficiencies in buildings, it ranges from anywhere where you're wasting 20 to 40 to 50%, depending on what kinds of buildings and what countries you're talking about. So it provides a significant opportunity for us to save anything from 10 to 15% of the energy that has been imported into the country, just by targeting buildings alone. That is one of the reasons why buildings are so important to the CARICOM situation. And of course, naturally, the context of buildings is framed within broader regional energy efficiency strategy, which we refer to as REES. This was recently, last year, January 2015, the energy efficiency strategy. The mandate for developing that was given by the energy ministers last year, January, at a quoted, what we call a Council on Economic Trade and Development. That's what we call it. And one of the ministerial councils in CARICOM. So the pathway for the energy efficiency strategy is one where we are in the process of baselining the situation where energy use and energy efficiency in the region is concerned. Because the truth is, we do not have a lot of information regarding the energy use pattern in the region. Each time we have talked about coming up with strategies or targets for energy efficiency, we have always found that there is not enough data that speaks to how people use energy and which sectors are using what. There's a lot of what we could call big data. There's a lot of data regarding the aggregated use. But when this aggregated, you can't really specifically say which sector is using what in terms of cooling and heating services, etc. It's very difficult to get that kind of disaggregated data, and this is something that we believe is going to be important for your comprehensive strategy. And you will see that come out in a couple of minutes from now. Because once we understand really what the usage pattern is, it allows us to be able to identify where the hotspots are, where are there the opportunities for the productive sectors and subsectors that we can make the biggest impact in terms of efficient energy use. Not targeting only electricity, but energy services in general. And that would be the second step, is to identify where are the potentials for the biggest gain. And then looking at those potentials, then setting targets qualitatively and otherwise, and indicators for seeing where we are with respect to meeting those targets, and then designing action plans with policies, regulations, and programs. And importantly, regulations is something that we sometimes underutilize with respect to energy efficiency. In fact, within CARICOM right now, there are no countries that has any energy efficiency laws, none. Jamaica has been talking about developing energy efficiency laws, and even now the building regulations which are targeting energy efficiency use as part of it is a first step in that direction, but the countries do not typically have energy efficiency laws. Some have energy efficiency policies, but none have translated them into laws that can actually be regulated and in a sense, enforced. One of the challenges, though, in terms of developing regulations and laws with respect to energy efficiency has been that in many instances there's a lack of what we call a regional quality infrastructure to support energy efficiency products. And that has been something that has driven a lot of the markets away from energy efficiency. It has caused some markets to be energy shy. Something like changing light bulbs from incandescents to CFLs, people would expect that it would be a very, easy thing to do, and why not do it? But we have had experiences over the region where it has failed for a number of reasons. In Jamaica had its own experiences for different reasons. In the case of Grenada, for instance, though, they had actually an experience where all the CFLs were failing within 6 months. And this was after you are telling people that CFLs are expected to last 10 times as long as incandescents. And so what we recognize is that there are poor quality energy efficient products in the market. And the fact is that the life cycle of the products makes sense if the products are to pay back for themselves. When you do your calculation, there's a payback period that you expect to recover your investment over. And if that payback period is not met, then you lose, you would not have met your investment, And if you don't have time beyond that payback, then you don't have a profit. So for it to make sense, then you must make sure that there's a quality infrastructure that ring-fence that. And so the quality infrastructure is one which is important. We have a mandate for the quality infrastructure that came from the heads of the ministers of energy, where they asked for a regional energy building code to be developed by CROSSQ, and that this should address buildings. And they also asked for energy efficiency labeling standards regarding appliances and so on. So we use that as a basis to drive the RQI, because without me saying to CROSSQ, listen, the ministers have given us a mandate, we need to do it, they would probably not have done it. So I was able to use these mandates as a basis to push CROSSQ in that direction. And so we are now in the process of advancing an RQI that looks at energy labeling for appliances, and there's a regional project team that is already looking at this. We're looking at performance standards for different types, or a couple of select appliances. We're looking at refrigerators and freezers in particular, air conditioning systems, lighting, and lighting in particular with CFL and LEDs. And we are expecting that by next year we'll also start looking at fans, motors, and pumps, where we are going to have minimum energy performance standards that will remove the lowest performing devices and appliances from the markets, protect the markets from those things that are actually dangerous to the operating costs for your citizens. Because in many instances, it's the poorest people who end up buying these things, and they cannot afford the operating costs. It's a reality that we have to face. And the truth is that they are not so cheap compared to the energy efficient items in any case. And if they are taken from the market, we believe the markets will levelize. And importantly, we are working on options, and you will see later, where we are going to provide opportunities for innovative financing schemes. And I heard Eva talking earlier about ESCOs, and these are some of the things that could also address some of these issues. We're looking at performance standards for solar water heaters and photovoltaic systems. This is also something we're going to look at because we want to make sure that the water heaters and the PVs are performing according to what the manufacturers state they will perform too. And then of course, the bottom line is the bottom line. All of this is going to be ring-fenced and wrapped into performance standards of buildings that is going to be linked to building codes. You know, and I know it's a tall order, and people will say, well, how could CARICOM be doing all of these things? And people have already said to me, Devon, you know, there's no way you can do all these things. They tried with this building code thing for 30 years, it has failed. Well, let's try another time, no? You never know. Let's see what happens. Because at the end of the day, if you stop because you have done it a couple of times before and it has not worked, then you never know when you will get to that threshold where it will actually work. So we will continue doing it until we are able to circumvent that hurdle. So we're committed to this thing, and we're going to work and see how we can get it done. And we have already established regional project teams for the energy labeling standards. That project team has already worked. They have a mandate to deliver a regional label that will be able to inform persons within the region and what they are buying, so people know exactly what the operating costs of the devices are. That is what the label does. So the label tells you what it is you are buying, and then we put in the standards, the performance standards, the minimum energy performance standards, to exclude those which are really underperforming. So so you'd use a mix of exclusion and information to drive the markets, the efficiencies in the markets forward. And this is important to the discussion on energy and the energy efficiency building codes, because a significant part of buildings is linked to the appliances and the equipment that are inside of them. So, you know, buildings don't exist on their own. Buildings use light, it uses air conditioning, it uses refrigeration, etc. So it is important that we also get this piece right if it is that we are going to get the building codes to work in terms of the energy efficiency aspect of the code. And you know, we're not just looking at the standards being voluntary standards, we are also talking about making some of these standards mandatory. Of course, recognizing that different countries will adopt them in different times, in their own times. There are some countries already which have said, when these things are done, we will adopt them as mandatory standards. And there are others which say, well, we don't know, we'll look at them and see. So we don't expect that all 15 countries are going to carte blanche, adopt them as mandatory standard at the same time. We expect that the countries will adapt them over time in the way that they see fit. And in terms of the minimum standard energy performance standard, it's really what we say, it's really a minimum for CARICOM. So what we expect is that if, for instance, there's a minimum energy performance standard of, let's say, 4 kilowatt hours for, let's say, a coffee maker, Jamaica might adopt that, and if that's a CARICOM standard that is set, it's really a floor. And other countries can choose to adapt as their national minimum energy performance standards, numbers that are higher than the regional minimum. So the regional minimum is really a regional floor, and countries can go higher than the regional minimum. But the countries are not allowed, will not be allowed, based on what we are discussing, to go below. That is why it's really minimum. So you can go higher, but you cannot go beneath the regional minimum. That is what is expected. And in terms of the energy efficiency, the energy performance standards for solar water heaters and photovoltaic systems, that speaks for itself. You have had the experiences and have seen where there are solar water heaters coming from places where people know that come into the markets, and within 6 months, tanks burst, this burst, that not working, and PV systems the same. So, you know, we have to make sure that these things do not creep in and kill the markets, because people who have had bad experiences can also, you know, we will spread that information, and then the good products in the market will not necessarily be distinguishable from the bad ones. In terms of the building codes, we also have already a regional project team that is in an advanced state of looking at the building codes, and I will speak a bit more about that when I speak now about the building code issue. So where we are, what we did was we mapped out a process through which we would have done the building code. It's not just looking at setting up the code, as I mentioned. It's looking at the whole thing, looking at identifying what the code will look like. Look at what we call the application documents for the code. Look at the conformity and for the code and the enforcement requirements. And we have been doing that also for the minimum energy performance standards too. So the minimum energy performance standards, the whole RQI thing, it comes not just with the standards themselves, but it also comes with the conformity and testing arrangement and enforcement piece, where we also provide to countries recommendations and conformity recommendation and testing recommendations and enforcement. And in particular, with respect to the appliances and the MEPs for appliances too, we are in the process of developing centers of excellence for testing within the region. Jamaica will be the center of excellence through the Bureau of Standards for refrigeration and air conditioners. And Trinidad will be the center of excellence for lighting. So we are actually looking at those things, and we are adding to that what we call mutual recognition agreements, where there will be select labs who will be accredited that importers can provide certification from. And those will have equivalencies standards that would be recognized by the testing lab. So if something that goes to a lab in Mexico that is a recognized lab, for instance, because you're buying your product in Mexico, need not go to the Bureau of Standard in Jamaica for retesting, so long as that certificate is one that is on the list of MRAs. So in terms of the building code, we had a roadmap. We have a roadmap which we have launched, and we have started this thing. So we have been looking at the regional constraints. We have been developing the RBC, and we have actually reached a stage where we are at number 4, where we are looking at supporting supporting what is required for the adoption. We have developed a draft regional energy efficiency building code at this stage. What we are looking at is the 2018 IECC code, the International Environmental Conservation Code, and we have developed what we call a draft Caribbean application document to that code, which says how that code is to be implemented in the countries. Obviously, the application document is general enough for countries to then dig deep and create their specific national applications from the general regional application document. So the expectation again is not that countries will take the Caribbean application document and apply it in a wholesale manner, but to take the regional application document and identify where they might want to add or change 2 or 3 parameters. So in a sense, what you're getting at the national level is probably something that is 80% suitable to your situation that you can now tweak to make 100% suitable, rather than going through the process here where you would have had to start to build your own national application document from scratch, which costs money. So far, I can tell you that in the Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code setup, we would have spent close to $250,000 US to work with development partners. So what we are doing is looking at spending money that can benefit 15 countries at the same time, rather than each country spending the same amount of money individually to get to the same state. It really makes sense, because when you look at a lot of the features of the building stock in the region, there's a lot of similarities that the countries will be able to take from that. You're looking at things really, and just to complete the map, I'm showing you the roadmap, and I'll tell you some of the features that we have looked at in the code. So we went through a series of codes, including the ASHRAE codes. We looked at the Jamaica codes and all of the other codes that we have in the region. Then before we got to the state of agreeing on what it is we would have used as a base document or the base code, which is the IECC 2018. The members, we established, the regional committees now are establishing mirror communities within the countries through the bureaus. So in each country there will be a mirror committee that is looking at the energy efficiency building code application documents as drafted and making comments and input into that, so that comes back to the consultants and the regional process, where we would now make a refinement. So the expectation is that there will be, we produce it at the regional level with national inputs, because the regional project team constitutes representation from every single member state in CARICOM, because there's no such thing as a regional arrangement without national people. It's national people who make up regional bodies. So we have membership from every single country in the region on that regional project team. And those people were not people we hand-selected in CARICOM or in the CARICOM process. These were people nominated by the Bureau of Standards, the local national standards bodies in their countries. So whoever represents Jamaica in the regional project team is somebody nominated by the Bureau of Standards Jamaica, because they are close to the stakeholders on the ground. They know who are the people who would make sense for something like this, and they therefore nominate the folks who serve on the RPT. And then these RPT people work with the Bureau to set up national arrangements where these national players now get what the regional folks would have recommended, and then these national folks discuss it, add to it, change it, subtract, whatever it is, multiply, divide, you name it. You can even log it if you want. And when you're finished, you send back up your comments and whatever changes are being recommended. If it's substantial enough, it may require revision, it may require fulsome discussion again at the RPT. If it's not substantial and it's just simple changes, then obviously updates will happen and then it will come back to the countries for validation at that stage. So it's a process that is self-consistent that we are engaging in. And we expect that once these codes are developed, we will find ways and means of supporting the adaptation by looking at what are the conformity requirements, what are the enforcement requirements to go with those codes, and how we can get the codes adapted mandatorily where possible, and what would be required for mandatory adoption of those codes. Where voluntary, what can we do to encourage and promote the codes use? And we have some ideas and some of those things. And how do we develop and implement the standards that help to enhance and support the building codes, such as I said, the labeling standards and the MEPs. The conformity assessments, as I see, is an important one. The monitoring and enforcement and the statistics. The building energy reporting information is something that we are looking at for giving us information on how the code is performing. And we have ways and means on how we can get information from building energy use based on projects. And Eva has spoken about some of the projects which they are doing. What we are doing in the region with some of our partners is to make sure that projects that are doing energy efficiency retrofits or new buildings which are being built with energy efficiency will feed information on energy use into a central, building energy database. So we are able to see the performance of these buildings, and we can then say, these are the clear quantitative advantages or benefits, because we would have the numbers. And we're not just talking this talk, again, like some of the folks have said here, like the minister said this morning. In fact, the CARICOM Secretariat headquarters in Georgetown, Guyana, by next year this time, will be retrofitted to produce 100% of its energy use from solar PV. There will be efficient lighting inside there. We already started doing efficient cooling systems. And we're going to be doing solar PV generation, and we'll only be using diesel for backup when required. We will be completely off-grid, because we are trying to make sure that when we tell people about energy efficiency and energy efficient building use, energy efficient use in buildings, that the Secretariat is in a place to say we are doing it and we have the numbers to show. We have installed energy monitoring systems. We are getting $5.5 million from JICA US to support this. The CARICOM don't have money. Member states pay for CARICOM. So therefore CARICOM cannot have money because member states don't have money. But JICA is supporting us on this. And that work is expected to start in July this year. So that when heads of governments and ministers of governments walk into CARICOM and we talk about building energy efficiency or building energy use, they will be able to see in some of the visualization displays what exactly we are talking about. They'll be able to see the interventions that have been made and exactly what these means. And I'm running out of time now, so I am going to the last couple of slides. So in essence, we are looking at the 2018 International Energy Conservation Code as a base document. This code is addressing the requirements of building envelope and tropical systems. We chose this code because it spoke very directly to the tropical environment. There was a significant contribution in that section of the code from Hawaii that has a significant similarities to the Caribbean context. It addresses where the tropical environment is concerned, the building envelope, cooling systems, ventilation, pumping where it is available, lighting, and surface water heating. These are the things that this code addresses under the tropical climate volume. And that's the part that we are intending to apply to the CARICOM code. The climatic conditions we recognize in CARICOM are significantly challenged because you have mostly salty air in some countries, especially the smaller ones. Everywhere you go, there is coastal water, and it's high salinity that the buildings are faced with. So that poses challenges where maintenance and some of these things are concerned. And even where cooling is concerned, high humidity. And of course, there's a significant amount of solar radiation too, which even though it can help us where we're talking about solar generation, it impacts the facilities in terms of cooling requirements. And so the decision was made that we would have used that the 2018 version of the IECC. The current version that exists is the 2015, because we have been given the assurance that the 2018 version will be developed at a time which would coincide with what we are doing. We have been privy to the drafts of the 2018. We actually have a consultant working with us who is one of the lead authors on the 2018 IECC code, which is why we chose that consultant, because of his experience in working with the IECC code. He's from the US Virgin Islands. And our application documents are allowing us to look at daylighting, improve room air conditioning requirements, and maintenance practices. And so, to go to the last pieces, the last part of it, which talks about the implementation challenges and opportunities. In terms of implementation challenge, this was last year in Freeport, Grand Bahama. Countries are faced with many diverse situations. When countries have to be dealing with disasters of this kind and these kind of issues, there are many times that the codes are not going to be priority. So countries are, in many instances, going to be distracted from the work that is necessary to implement things like these, because it requires time, it requires attention, it requires money. But of course, at the same time, countries are challenged with other matters. But recognizing that the codes gives us an opportunity to become more efficient in energy use, that in part allows us to become, to strengthen that nexus with climate, to help us to improve our energy resource use, such that it impacts our energy economic growth and our use in technology deployment, and therefore impact the quality of life we're able to give to people, both as governments and but the people can themselves derive through the energy savings, the cost savings that they can derive from building energy use. That's an important thing that we believe that the code allows us. It allows us to adapt to our socio-economic development pathway, and it then drives mitigation on the mitigation side. So in a sense, the code is an adaptation and a mitigation tool simultaneously. And it is critical to the central piece to this development planning puzzle, which is the energy service supply opportunity, because what we are really looking at with the code is really how we can improve the way in which your energy services are utilized in buildings, so that you no longer end up just looking at electricity as your base energy service, but you can choose the energy service path that is most cost effective to drive that energy services in building that you require. We are now talking about seawater air conditioning in some hotels. We are talking about geothermal cooling in a couple of countries. We are no longer talking about electrical cooling as we are doing in all instances now. So that is the disaggregation that we are talking about that is important. And where financing is concerned, that's always going to be an opportunity for new investment frameworks to be developed. And we're talking about an utility-based or utility-style DESCO ever that we are piloting in Jamaica and Barbados. Already JPS and BL&P have signed on. And that will allow us to be able to test the implementation of the codes and the standards, because if you want to be able to access this kind of financing mechanism, which is a third-party mechanism that provides unbilled financing for retrofitting or new buildings development, then you must comply with the codes and meet the MEPs accordingly. So, even if it's voluntary in the country, and we have been talking to the IDB, the World Bank, and so on, and we will get to the state where, if it is that it's a public program, a public project that has been supported by public funds, then the codes and the MEPs will apply regardless of whether it's mandatory or voluntary in the countries. That's something that we believe is capable of allowing us to get those early movers in the markets. So in a sense, the existing utility role is one that could change from a supply approach to one where the utility provides a more demand-driven approach, where it provides a full range of energy services to consumers, and consumers, it democratizes the energy use, so consumers can decide where they want the energy from and how they want to use the energy, and the utility will finance it unbilled. And it addresses a critical problem, which this is the last slide, Kevin, I kid you not. It addresses a critical problem, which is this problem here. Ladies and gentlemen, 70% of building stocks in the region suffer from the split incentive, where the occupier of the building is either not the owner of the building, or it might be that the operator of the building is not the owner of the building, and there are so many split incentive dilemma. When you see a house that is already built, and you like the house, you want to buy the house, and the house is built in a certain way with a low roof that doesn't give you the passive energy design that you would require for good ventilation and lighting. You don't have a lot of options, especially if you can't find the money immediately to knock down and change. Retrofitting always costs most. So we believe the Building Energy Code addresses the split incentive dilemma directly and allows the governments of the region to help the building occupiers to lower their operation costs by making sure that those who are responsible for the design and building provide the features that take the operating cost of the building into consideration. And we expect that the zero energy building will provide information that could help us to validate some of what we are talking about in terms of options and opportunities and possibilities. I thank you very much.